I remember the first time I wandered into an attic at night. The air felt different up there, heavier, like it had been waiting untouched for years. The dust floated in slow spirals carried by a draft I couldn't find the source of. Each step on the wooden boards groaned like a warning, echoing into the dark corners where old trunks sat half-opened, and picture frames leaned against the wall, their glass cracked and faces blurred. I whispered to myself that it was only storage, only forgotten boxes and rusted hinges. But then the silence shifted. It wasn't just the wind or the house settling. It felt like someone else was breathing, just beyond the stacks of furniture wrapped in yellowed sheets. My flashlight flickered once, twice, and landed on something that shouldn't have been there. A handprint, fresh, smeared across the dusty window, even though no one had been inside for years. That's when I realized the attic wasn't empty, and I should never have opened the door that night. The attic smelled of old wood and earth. Winter fog pressed against the small attic window. Pale light seeped through the cracks in the boards. Dust hung in the air. Not the kind that settles, heavy and dull. This dust moved. At first I thought it was the wind, a draft slipping through the broken panes. But the patterns were too deliberate. They twisted across the floor, curling around boxes and trunks, as if someone walked slowly, unseen. The air trembled with their passage, though nothing made a sound. I knelt, tracing a finger through the thick haze. It rose in a soft spiral clinging to my skin. There was a faint, earthy smell, like wet soil after rain. I held my breath, waited. The dust stilled for a moment, then shifted again. It felt alive. Soft footfalls brushing the floor without weight. I froze. The attic seemed smaller now, the corners darker, the shadows waiting. My grandmother had left years ago, the house silent, but in the dust I could feel someone there, a presence lingering patient. Night deepened. The light faded to a pale gray. I saw them then. Footprints formed, bare, small, impossibly neat. They pressed into the dust as if it were soil, leading from the far corner toward me. I held my hand over my mouth. A soft hum rose in the boards, like the house was breathing around me. I wanted to step back, but the footprints ended at my feet. I knelt to touch them, cold, earthy, not dust, soil. The smell intensified, thick and wet in the stagnant air. Then they were gone. Morning light spilled through the gaps. The attic was empty. No footprints, no movement, just the lingering smell, damp, dark, stubborn. I searched the corners, under the old quilts, behind trunks. Nothing, only the dust, still trembling where it had settled, as if ashamed of its own mischief. I tried to tell myself it was the wind, a trick of the light. But even in the quiet I could feel it watching, patient, waiting. The shadows seemed to stretch toward me as I left. I kept my hand on the stair railing. The boards groaned beneath me, familiar yet foreign. When I returned that night, the dust had moved again. Patterns I didn't recognize. Footprints forming, fading before I could step closer. The smell followed me upstairs. Soft, subtle, but unmistakable. Earth, moist, alive. I stayed at the window for hours, watching the fog blur the world outside. The attic waited behind me, silent yet speaking in its small movements. I don't know if it wants me to see, or if it only wants to be noticed. Either way, I cannot stop watching the dust, and the dust cannot stop moving. The attic smelled of warm wood and dust. Summer air pressed through the cracked window. Pale light draped the boxes in soft rectangles. In the corner sat the trunk, heavy, dark, nailed shut. My father's warning lingered in my mind. "Never touch it," he said. I didn't need to ask why. Something about it felt alive. That night, the house was still. The fan hummed weakly, stirring the stagnant heat. I tried to read. The words blurred under the dim light. Then it started. A knock, soft, repetitive. I froze. The air grew thick, warm against my skin. Dust lifted in tiny spirals. The knocking paused when I held my breath. It started again. Slow, deliberate. From inside the trunk, my hands trembled. I touched the nails, cold, smooth, firm against my fingers. I pressed my ear to the wood. A faint scratching. Inside, beneath, something moving, restless. The room seemed smaller, Shadows pooled in the corners. I could almost see the trunk breathing, expanding, contracting. I knelt slowly, pulling at the nails with the dull edge of a screwdriver. The metal groaned. The trunk shivered. The scratching intensified, like tiny claws pressing against the inside walls. When it finally gave way, the lid lifted with a sigh. Empty. Nothing inside but pale wood and shadows. I leaned closer, fingers tracing the inside. The scratching was gone, replaced by lines etched deep into the wood. My heart stopped. The lines spelled my name, slow, deliberate, carved as if someone had waited for me. The attic went silent. The dust settled again, but heavier this time. The air tasted of old earth and metal. I pulled back, stood in the faint light alone. The trunk waited patiently. I wanted to close it. Wanted to pretend it had never moved, never called. But my name was still there, carved into the wood. I left the attic door cracked. The house hummed softly around me, and though the night was still, I could feel it. Waiting. The trunk does not speak. It does not move. Yet I know it listens. I do not return for weeks, but the memory of scratching, of nails pressing under my fingers, follows me through every room, every quiet corridor. Even now in the daylight, I can see the shadows in the corner of the attic. The faint perfect lines in the wood calling my name. I do not touch the trunk. I do not go near it. But sometimes when the house is still, I think I hear a soft knock and a whisper just beneath the wood. My name. The bedroom smelled of linen and old wood. Night pressed against the windows. Summer air was heavy still. I slept beneath the attic. The ceiling sagged slightly above my bed. Shadows pooled where the pale light could not reach. I thought it was the wind. A faint draft slipping through cracks. Soft rustling in the boards above. But it wasn't the wind. At first the whispers were low, almost lost in the hum of the house. They stretched through the floorboards, soft, curling around the bedposts, brushing against my skin like a slow sigh. I pulled the blanket closer. The scent of old wood filled my nose, mixed with something damp, earthy, faint. Then it spoke. My name. Drawn out, slow, deliberate. I froze. The bed shifted slightly. The ceiling pressed down, subtle but real, as if someone, something, was leaning from above. The whisper lingered. A breath along my ear, a hum vibrating through the floor. I tried to move. My arms felt heavy, my fingers slow. Even the air seemed thicker. I listened. Every board stretched, bent, whispering. The name repeated, once, twice. Soft footsteps seemed to circle the room, never landing, never leaving. I smelled damp earth again, faint like soil under rain, and something stale, like the attic itself was breathing down. I wanted to scream, but no sound left my lips. Only the whispers, curling and curling, tangled in the corners and under the bed. I reached for the ceiling. It did not yield. I could feel the weight pressing, slow, patient, deliberate. The room went still, a silence so thick I could taste it. The hum vanished. The whisper vanished, but the weight remained. Slight, almost imagined, yet undeniable against my ribs. I lay there, eyes open, listening. Each creak, each groan of the old house told me I was not alone. I traced the shadows with my gaze. Corners held shapes, pale and unmoving, yet they watched, patient, waiting for me to drift, to sleep again. By morning, the air lightened. The ceiling sagged no more. The whispers faded into the hum of the house. I did not speak of it. I did not move the bed. I only waited, heart slow, breath quiet, for the next night, and the whisper that would find me through the floorboards, calling my name. The attic smelled of oil and old wood. Evening fog pressed against the small window. Shadows pooled where the pale light could not reach. In the corner sat the lantern, old, rusted, and untouched for decades. Yet sometimes it glowed. My mother said it hadn't been lit in years, not since she was a child. And still the faint flame pulsed in the dark. The air was heavy. A storm rolled across the horizon. Thunder low and distant, rattling the window frames. The lantern's glow grew brighter, warm, soft, moving slightly as if carried by invisible hands. I could see its light brushing against the boxes, the trunks, the dust. I held my breath. The hum of the house deepened, slow and steady. The shadows stretched toward me. I approached slowly. Every step raised the dust in tiny spirals. The lantern drifted a few inches closer as though it were walking toward me. Its glow painted the attic in amber light. The smell of old oil and damp wood filled my nose. I reached out, my hand trembling. The lantern was ice cold. Every bit of warmth vanished under my fingers. I could feel it, steady and solid but completely lifeless in touch. The light flickered. For a moment, it seemed to pulse with something alive. Then it dimmed, faint and hesitant. I stepped back. The attic felt smaller. The shadows retreated slightly, but not entirely. The storm grew louder. Wind pressed against the window, rattling the boards. The lantern glowed brighter again. Moving, always moving. I could smell wet earth faintly, drifting from somewhere above. The air thickened, heavy with the quiet hum of something unseen. I wanted to step away, but my eyes kept returning to it. It hovered in the corner, patient, glowing just beyond reach, silent, waiting. I wanted to lift it, to see inside. But the cold, the stillness of it made me pause. I stepped back, letting the attic settle around me. The lantern's glow dimmed. Shadows folded into the corners, and yet I could still feel it. Watching. Moving just out of reach. I left the lantern in the corner. The storm rolled on outside, its hum mingling with the quiet of the attic. I did not touch it again that night, but the glow lingered in my mind. Soft, distant, almost alive, and I knew somehow it would move again when no one was watching. The attic smelled of faded paper and dust. Sunlight crept through the small cracks in the boards. Shadows stretched across the floor, long and thin. I found the photograph tucked behind a trunk. Its edges were curled, brittle under my fingers. The image unsettled me. A family sat in front of the house, but their faces were strange. Blurs of pale light shifting like smoke. I traced the shapes with my finger. The paper smelled faintly of damp wood and ink. The hum of the house pressed in around me. I set it on the floor, sat back on my heels. The air was heavy, warm against my skin. Something moved in the corner of the attic. A shadow stretched, then recoiled. The photograph seemed brighter. I leaned closer. The blurs shifted imperceptibly. Soft, curling shapes of light, like something breathing just beneath the surface. I touched the image. Cold. But beneath the cold, a faint vibration. Subtle, deliberate. I put it down for the night. The attic was still. Dust settled softly as if apologizing for its own movements. Morning came slow. The sunlight was pale and thin. I returned to the photograph. One figure had changed. A blur now held my face. Perfect. Pale, still, my stomach sank. The air tasted faintly of metal. The hum of the house seemed louder, focused. Listening, I wanted to throw it away. I wanted to tear the paper. But my hands froze. The photograph waited, silent, patient. The blurred figures did not move. Except for me. I could feel the attic watching. Dust stirred without wind. Shadows curled toward the photograph. I stepped back. The sunlight faded behind clouds. The air grew thick and cold. I put the photograph on the highest shelf. Far from reach, still I could feel it. That soft, insistent presence. Even now, I sense it shifting, waiting, stretching its pale light. For me, the attic smelled of old paper and dust. A faint fog pressed through the window cracks. Pale light touched the leaning bookcase, long shadows curling behind it. I noticed it by accident. A narrow seam, hidden, almost imperceptible. No handle, nothing to pull, just a door. Waiting, that night I dreamed. The door opened slowly. A faint warmth slipped through the gap, breathing against my face. I reached for it but could not move. Morning came thin and gray. The bookcase had shifted. The seam widened. The door stood revealed, patient. I did not touch it. I only stared. Its surface was cold, smooth, unyielding under my fingers. The attic hummed softly. Dust lifted in tiny spirals. Shadows pressed against the corners. The air smelled faintly of wet wood, of something old and hidden. At night I hear it sometimes. A creak, slow, deliberate. The door moving as if breathing. I do not go near. I do not push. But I feel it. Patient, waiting just beyond reach. The walls seem thinner there. The floor hums faintly under my steps. The air presses closer to me, heavy and silent. I close my eyes. I imagine the door moving, stretching the shadows into shapes I cannot name. When I open my eyes, the bookcase stands still. The door is still there, narrow, silent, impossible. I do not sleep beneath it anymore. I leave it alone. Yet even in daylight, I can feel its weight, the pull of something waiting behind wood. The house is quiet, too quiet. But sometimes when the world is still, I hear it again. A soft creak, and a breath, long and patient. I never open the door. I never want to, but I know it is there, watching. The attic smelled of oil and old fabric. Afternoon fog pressed against the cracked window. Pale light pooled over the worn floorboards. By the window sat the sewing machine. Rusted, heavy, silent, most of the time, but at night it clicked. I told myself it was old parts shifting, the wheel spinning slowly on its own. The hum of the house wrapped around it. Dust swirled at its base. Shadows stretched across the walls. I could feel the machine waiting. One night, I woke to movement. The wheel turned. Slow, deliberate. The needle rose and fell, slicing through empty air. I held my breath. The scent of oil and linen filled the attic. The air trembled softly like the house was breathing along with it. The next morning, I saw it. A dress, half finished, draped over the machine as if it had always been there. The fabric. I had never seen anything like it. Soft, pale, almost glowing in the morning light. I ran my fingers along it, cool, delicate, unearthly. The hum lingered in the room. Dust settled in slow spirals. The shadows seemed to curl closer to the machine, as if to watch. I stepped back. The wheel was still, waiting. The dress untouched, yet stitched perfectly. I could not explain it. No thread, no scissors, no hands. Only the quiet rhythm of something unseen working through the night. I left the attic door open. The sunlight moved across the floorboards. But the machine waited in its corner, patient, silent, eternal. Even now, I sense it at night. The faint click of the wheel, the soft brush of fabric under invisible fingers. And the dress, always waiting for more. I do not go near it often, yet I cannot leave it behind. Something in the quiet, the hum, the air calls me back. The attic smelled of old paper and varnished wood. Afternoon light seeped through the cracks in the boards. Dust hung in the air, still and thick. I found it under a loose floorboard. The family Bible, heavy and leather-bound. Its spine cracked softly as I lifted it. The pages smelled of ink and something faintly metallic. I opened it slowly. Names were written in red, some fading, some sharp and bright. I didn't recognize them. Names I had never heard. They twisted across the page, curling like shadows. I traced a finger along the ink. It was dry, but somehow alive. The pages trembled lightly under my touch. Weeks passed. I returned to the Bible often, a ritual of curiosity and quiet dread. One morning I opened it and froze. A name had appeared. My name. The ink was fresh, bright against the yellowed pages. My parents swore they hadn't touched it. I wanted to believe them. The attic felt smaller. Shadows curled along the walls, long and patient. I could smell the old wood, the faint metallic tang of the ink. I could feel it pressing against my fingers. The hum of the house seemed louder, focused, attentive. I closed the Bible slowly, set it back under the boards, but I could not leave it behind. At night, I think of the names, each one a whisper curling in the corners of the room, stretching across the floorboards to reach me. I wonder who will come next, or if I already have. The attic waits quietly. Dust settles in soft spirals. The Bible lies hidden, patient. I do not touch it anymore, but I can feel the red ink curling, watching, waiting, just beneath the surface of the page. The attic smelled of old wood and cold sunlight. The window was cracked, letting in pale light and faint dust. Shadows stretched across the floorboards, long and thin. By the window sat the rocking chair, old, heavy, worn smooth by years of use. During the day, it seemed still, but at night, it moved. Gentle, rhythmic, back and forth, though no wind touched it. I watched it once from the doorway. The hum of the house filled the attic. Dust lifted in tiny spirals as the chair swayed. Curiosity pressed me closer. I reached out, touching the arm. The moment my hand met the wood, it froze. I pulled back slowly. The air tasted faintly of old varnish and cold steel. Shadows curled against the walls, still but attentive. Morning came. The sunlight fell uneven across the floor. The chair had moved, turned. Facing my bed, I could not explain it. No one had touched it. Yet it waited, patient. At night, I hear the soft creak again. Back and forth. A breath in the silence. I do not touch it anymore. I step lightly past it, feeling the pull of its quiet presence. The air hums softly around it. The shadows stretch toward the bed, and I lie awake, listening, for the gentle sway and the weight of its silent attention. The attic smelled of paint and old wood. Fog pressed against the window, pale and hesitant. Shadows pooled across the floorboards. One window was painted shut. Years of peeling layers clinging to the frame. During the day, it seemed still, silent, forgotten. At night, it moved. A soft rattle, gentle, deliberate. As if someone pressed from the outside, trying to push it open. I held my breath. The air was heavy with dust and faint ozone. The house hummed softly around me. I imagined a branch, the wind. But the attic was 3 stories high. No one could reach it. One night I woke to a crack, the paint splitting along the edges. A subtle, deliberate fracture. I approached slowly, fingers trembling, brushing the wood. The smell of old paint was sharp in my nose, tinged with something damp, earthy, impossible. I pressed my face close to the glass. Handprints. Fingers splayed across the window pane. Outside, impossible. The air thickened. The attic shrank around me. Every shadow seemed to lean in. I backed away slowly. The paint had cracked, but the glass remained still. The handprints were faint, almost fading, as if whatever left them had retreated, waiting. The hum of the house softened. The dust settled in delicate spirals. Silence pressed against my ears, my skin, my chest. I do not touch that window again. I do not look closely at the glass. But I can feel it, the memory of those hands, pressed against wood and glass, waiting just beyond reach. Even now, on still nights, I hear the soft rattle, a faint press against the frame, and I lie awake, listening. The attic smelled of cold wood and old paper. Winter fog pressed lightly against the small window. Shadows pooled around the stacked boxes. Among them lay the music box, broken silent for years. Dust caked its edges, faint oil scent lingering in the air. I passed it often, ignored it, pretended it was just another relic of the past. Then one night, it began. A soft melody, slow, uneven, warped, bending like a child humming off key. I froze. The air thickened around me, cold against my skin, dust stirring in tiny spirals at my feet. I reached for it. The box clicked, word twisting against my fingers. The tune slowed, stretching, twisting into something wrong, almost alive. Panic rose like smoke in my chest. I grabbed a heavy book, smashed the music box into splinters. Silence followed. The attic seemed to exhale. Shadows receded slightly. Morning came pale and thin. Sunlight fell across the floorboards. The music box sat on the shelf, whole, silent, waiting. I pressed my fingers to it, cold, smooth, unyielding. The faint scent of oil lingered in the air. A subtle hum seemed to pulse beneath the wood. I stepped back. The attic felt smaller, dust and shadow curling in corners. I do not touch it again. I leave it alone, but I sense it. Waiting for night, for the cold and the fog, for the moment it will play again. Even now, in daylight, I feel the pull of the tune. Slow, warped, patient. A melody that bends, calling softly from the shadows. The music box is not broken. It never will be. It waits, and it watches, and it hums quietly when the world is still. The attic smelled of wool and old wood. Pale light sifted through the high window. Dust hung thick in the corners, drifting in slow spirals. At the far end, a quilt was folded. Soft, heavy, patterned in colors, faded with time. It seemed still, but not quite. At night, I noticed movement. The quilt shifted gently, as though something inside breathed. A slow rise and fall, subtle, patient. I pressed closer. The air was warm, faintly sweet with old fabric and oil. Shadows stretched toward me. I gathered courage, lifted the quilt slowly. Nothing. Empty air beneath the folds, but the wood beneath. Still warm, like a body had just been there. A shiver ran through me. The quilt smelled faintly of sweat and dust and something else I could not name. The attic seemed smaller, pressing in. I set it back down. The warmth lingered in the floorboards. The quilt seemed heavier than before. I stepped back. The shadows pulled along the walls. The hum of the house softened, and silence settled like fog. I returned to the quilt at dawn. It lay folded, perfectly still, but I could feel it. Waiting, breathing softly, even in daylight, I do not lift it again at night. I do not approach its far corner. Yet I sense it, a presence folded beneath fabric and dust, stretching gently with each breath of the house. The quilt waits, patient, soft, and warm, long after the air has cooled. The attic smelled of leather and dust. Pale winter light pressed through the high window. Shadows pooled across the floorboards, still and patient. I found the journal tucked beneath a trunk, its cover worn, soft under my fingers. The pages smelled faintly of ink and something metallic. I opened it slowly. The entries described nights, eerily like my own. Footsteps across floorboards, whispers curling through corners, pale lights drifting just out of reach, each page pressed against my fingertips, warm from my touch, the ink sharp and metallic. The entries ended suddenly. It's inside the walls now. It knows I see it. I froze. The attic was silent. Dust hung in soft spirals around me. The hum of the house softened as though listening. I put the journal away, tried to forget it. But the memory of the words lingered. A week later, I returned. The journal lay where I left it. The pages had changed. A new entry appeared. In my handwriting, familiar, impossible. Every letter pressed deep into the paper, as though my fingers had touched it without my knowing. I traced the words. The leather smelled faintly of sweat and old wood. The attic seemed smaller, shadows curling closer with every breath. I stepped back. The air pressed in against my skin, warm, thick, expectant. The hum of the house returned, soft, persistent. The journal waited silently, patient and impossible. I do not touch it again. I leave it closed. Yet I feel it, waiting, breathing along with the house, watching, patient, stretching across the walls. Even now, I sense the entries forming, ink shaping itself into words I do not yet understand, and I lie awake, listening. The attic smelled of varnish and old canvas. Pale light filtered through the small window, dust hanging in soft spirals around me. A massive portrait hung crooked on the far wall. Its frame was thick, carved, and heavy. At first I only noticed the eyes. They seemed to shift when I wasn't looking. A glance away, then back. Slight movement, impossible, deliberate. The air was warm and still, but a faint hum pressed through the floorboards. Shadows curled toward the painting, pulling the edges of the frame into the gloom. I studied the faces of the family. Parents, 2 children, all pale in the fading light. The eyes followed me softly, and the corners of their mouths flickered as if breathing. Days passed. I kept checking. At first just the eyes, then small changes. One of the children no longer appeared in the painting. I traced the outline of the empty space. The canvas smelled faintly of dust and cold paint. The wooden floor beneath me thrummed with a quiet pulse, as if the house itself noticed the absence. I stepped back. The attic seemed to shrink, the air heavier, warmer. The shadows leaned closer. Regret pressed softly in my chest. I had watched it shift. I had waited and stared. And now, one of the family was gone, erased while I stood there. The hum of the house softened. Dust settled slowly. The portrait hung crooked, patient, waiting, silent, watching. I do not approach it often. I do not look too long, but I feel it. The pull of absence, the shifting gaze, and the quiet regret lingering in the air. Even now, in dim light, I sense a movement in the eyes, as if the painting remembers. and waits for me to notice again. The attic smelled of dust and old wiring. Storm clouds pressed against the small window, fog curling in from the eaves. A radio sat on a crate, its surface mottled with age. I hadn't touched it in years. During the day, it hummed quietly, a dull presence among the boxes. At night, it spoke differently. One stormy evening, the static broke. Soft at first. A faint voice, warped and uneven. "Come!" Upstairs. I froze. The air thickened, warm with damp and electricity. The hum of the house softened, listening. I reached for the dial. My fingers trembled. The static pulsed beneath my skin like a heartbeat that did not belong to me. I pulled back. The voice faded, leaving only the soft, endless hiss. A hum threading through the floorboards, through the walls, through the quiet of the house. I never touched the dial again. But some nights, even when unplugged, the static returns. It hums quietly, pressing against my ears, curling along the walls. Soft and insistent. Alone with it, I feel it move. The storm dies. The fog retreats. The attic is silent. Yet the radio waits. Patient. Cold plastic and dust. And the faintest echo of a voice, calling me upstairs, breathing with the house, always listening. I step past it carefully. The hum lingers in my chest, in the floor, in the silence. Even in daylight, I sense the pull. The attic is not empty. The radio waits, and I know it will hum again. The attic smelled of mothballs and old fabric. Pale light spilled from the small window, dust drifting slowly through the beams. A suitcase sat near the far wall, its leather cracked, straps frayed with age. Inside, old clothes folded carefully, faded linens and wool smelling faintly of cedar. I dug through it slowly. Soft rustling pressed in the quiet, the hum of the house pulsing beneath my feet. Then I found something strange. Tucked in the lining, locks of hair tied with ribbon. Each bundle labeled with a date, written in careful, looping ink. I traced the dates with my fingertips. Warm against the cold leather, fingers trembling. The last date. Matched the day I was born, I froze. The attic seemed to close in. Shadows curled closer to the suitcase, air thick with the scent of wool and dust. I pulled the suitcase shut. The leather sighed softly beneath my hands. The ribbons pressed faintly against the surface, like small pulses under the skin of the bag. I stepped back. The room hummed quietly, and a shiver ran through the floorboards. The attic held its breath, watching, waiting. I do not open it again. I leave it folded in its corner. But I feel it. A presence in the lining tied with ribbon and dated. Silent, patient, aware. Even now, when the air is still and pale light falls across the floor, I sense it, quiet and waiting, as if the suitcase knows I remember. The attic smelled of cold glass and dust. Pale light seeped through the beams, shivering across the floorboards. An oval mirror leaned against the wall. Its surface slightly tarnished, edges worn with time. I moved past it carefully. At first I thought it was my eyes, but my reflection never matched me. A delay. A blink too slow. A head tilt, a heartbeat behind. I watched my movements, breath quiet, the hum of the house threading through the boards. The mirror waited. Some nights I lingered. The reflection followed, but not perfectly. It whispered patience, stretching its lag across the silence. One night I turned to leave. Soft, almost beneath hearing, it breathed words against the back of my neck. "Don't leave me." I froze. The air thickened, damp and heavy. Dust hung in slow spirals around me. The attic seemed smaller, folding in on itself, listening. I stepped back. The mirror tilted slightly. Its surface caught a pale glint of light and my own eyes staring, but not quite my own. I do not linger there anymore. I pass it quickly. Yet I feel its presence. Cold glass pressed into shadow, breathing with the room, patient, watchful. Even when I am far alone in other rooms, I sense the delay of movement, the memory of the voice, a whisper threaded through the house, soft, persistent, waiting for me to return. The attic smelled of old paper and cedar. Pale morning light spilled through the small window, dust motes drifting like tiny ghosts. Boxes were stacked carefully along the wall. Wood creaked beneath the weight. I stepped back, surveying my work. The shadow was there, always behind the boxes. Even when sunlight flooded the room, it clung to the floorboards, stretching along the walls, moving when I did not. I shifted the boxes, pulled them into new rows, leaned one against another. The shadow followed. Cold, silent, patient. It did not belong to the boxes. It did not belong to the beams or the crooked window. I realized slowly that it was cast by nothing in the room. I crouched closer. The air smelled faintly of wood and dust. I felt it brush along my arm, light as a breath but present, alive. I moved a box with trembling hands. The shadow stretched, rippling, not with light, but with intent. It shifted just slightly, like a watcher leaning forward. I did not touch the boxes again. I let them sit, let the shadow linger behind them. It was patient, silent, watching. Even when I left the attic, I could feel it, pressing gently through the floorboards, following my steps. Alone in my room, I sensed it behind every door, hovering at the edges of sight. The shadow does not move like light. It moves like thought, like memory, like something waiting to be remembered. I have learned to leave it be. I pass it carefully now, never reaching out. It stays behind the boxes, quiet, and I am always aware of it. The attic smelled of rain before the storm had fully passed. Damp air clung to the beams, dripping softly from corners I hadn't noticed before. After the rain, the scent of soil was stronger. Earth, wet and heavy, pressing into the wooden floorboards. The roof had not leaked. No water stains. Nothing to explain it. I knelt near the beams, hands brushing against cold, rough wood. I dug lightly with my fingers, felt the dust shift, heard it rustle faintly. Nothing. Just floorboards, just shadows stretching along the walls. At night, the smell returned, stronger, clinging to the corners, rising in curls along my ankles. I inhaled slowly, the scent thick with mud and something older, something sour and metallic. One evening, I noticed something new. Tiny drops of mud seeped through the cracks in the boards. They landed on my hands cold and sticky. I touched the smell, tried to trace it to its source, but the wood felt empty, silent beneath my fingers. I stayed, listening. The hum of the house seemed heavier. The dust hung thicker. Each breath pulled more of that damp earth into me, as if the attic itself had taken root. I wanted to leave, but my feet pressed into the floorboards. The smell grew stronger when I moved. It pressed in behind my ears, into the hollows of my breath. I thought about covering the cracks, blocking the gaps with rags or cardboard. But I could not stop it. The earth was patient, waiting. Some nights I swear I hear it moving, shifting beneath the boards, soft, slow, deliberate. A hum of wet clay, the quiet sigh of mud against wood. I stopped trying to understand. I stopped digging. But still the smell follows me, follows the steps down the stairs, follows into rooms I thought were dry. It lingers even when the attic is empty, even when the boards are bare. I cannot ignore it. I cannot breathe fully. The earth is here, and I feel its memory pressing against me. A warning, perhaps, or a reminder of something I will never uncover. The attic smelled faintly of wax and dust. A stub of a candle rested on a high shelf, its wick blackened but strangely untouched. At night, I noticed it first, a pale flame flickering gently, though no one had lit it. The air held its warmth, but my fingers felt nothing when I reached. The flame never grew, never shrank. The wax remained stubbornly solid. I blew at it once. The flame wavered, then returned, tall and steady, as if it had never been gone. I stared, breath shallow, the attic shadows twisting along the beams. The flame danced alone, casting pale light over stacks of boxes, over the dust that never settled. Sometimes I left it burning. Sometimes I watched it from the stairs, hesitant to move too close. The soft hum of the house made it feel alive. The wick trembled, but the wax did not. I tried to touch it, to pin it down to reason, but the warmth faded at my fingertips. It was there. And yet it was not. A presence lingering quietly in the corners, watching. I thought of snuffing it out, of ending the quiet insistence. I leaned forward, breath heavy, fingers trembling. I blew. The flame bowed as if obeying, then rose again. It waited, always waiting. The candle's light stretched along the beams, shadows curling in slow, deliberate spirals. The attic smelled warmer now, wax and dust thickened with a strange weight. I could feel it pressing at my shoulders as if asking me to stay, to watch. I tried ignoring it, tried leaving it alone. But when I returned, there it was, flickering softly, patient, unmoved by time or my breath or the stillness of the room. I cannot explain why it burns, why the wax refuses to change, or why the flame feels watchful, expectant. I leave the attic door cracked now. Sometimes I hear soft whispers of movement above the boards, or the subtle shift of air near the candle. It hums quietly to itself, and I know it will be there tomorrow night, waiting, burning alone. The attic smelled of paper and dust. A box sat in the corner, bound with fraying twine. It looked ordinary, but something about it made the air feel heavier. I knelt beside it. The twine crinkled under my fingers. Inside, letters stacked neatly, their edges curled from time. Each envelope bore the same words written in careful ink. To my daughter. I picked up the first. The paper smelled faintly of cedar and old rain. The handwriting was soft, looping, intimate. I touched the letters gently, the paper almost warm beneath my fingertips. Curiosity drew me deeper. I flipped through them one by one. Each told fragments of a life I didn't know. Stories of care, protection, warnings, and longing, and always the sense that someone watched me from the shadows. At the bottom of the box, a single envelope lay sealed, different from the rest. No flourish on the ink, no neat lines, just heavy, bare paper. I opened it. The pages were blank except for a few trembling words. I can't let it have you. I felt the air thicken. The attic's silence pressed against me. The wood beneath my knees creaked, soft and deliberate, like the house itself was holding its breath. I read the words again. My name seemed to hover just beneath the letters, though it was never written. The ink was fresh, still smelling faintly of cedar and something darker, iron perhaps, or damp earth. I wanted to put the envelope down. I wanted to escape the cold weight of that unfinished sentence. But something held me, a hush in the attic, a faint hum that wasn't the wind. The letters shifted subtly in the box, as if breathing, as if waiting. I stood slowly, the paper whispering against itself. Every shadow in the attic seemed to stretch toward me, leaning from corners and under beams. I heard soft footsteps, or thought I did, and my heart thudded against the silence. I left the box untouched for a night. In the morning, the letters had not moved. The envelope still lay on top. Yet when I glanced again, I could swear the twine had loosened slightly, like fingers had brushed against it. I've never dared open it since. But sometimes, in the dead stretch of night, I hear the faint rustling of paper from the corner, and a voice almost imperceptible whispers, "Remember, it waits. I don't touch the letters. I don't go near the box." But the memory lingers. The attic smells of paper and dust, and the weight of words left unsent presses quietly against my chest, like something waiting for me to return. The attic smelled faintly of varnish and old wood. A thin shaft of moonlight slipped through the small window. The latter lay folded against the ceiling, silent and still. At first, I thought it was the wind, or my father moving it carelessly. But the hinges were tight, the rope frayed and still. Nothing should have moved it. Some nights I hear it before I see it, a soft scraping above, then a sudden creak, and the ladder unfolds itself, inch by inch, descending into the quiet attic air. I pressed my palm against the rough wood. Cold, smooth in places. The ropes hung slack, yet they move as though pulled from above. No one is there. No one ever is. My father insists it's loose hinges, a trick of the ropes. But I can see the subtle shadows, the ropes curling and straining, as if fingers unseen tug them gently. I try to ignore it. The ladder rests now. Still. But when I leave the room or close my eyes at night, I sense it stretching, reaching downward slowly, like a hand waiting to touch the floor. I've stopped trying to climb it. Even the thought feels wrong. The attic is quiet otherwise. Only the wood hums faintly under the weight of shadows. Only the moonlight glints off the rope. Sometimes I lie awake and hear it rustle. Soft, deliberate. The rope whispers against the beams. A rhythm. A warning, maybe. I wonder what it would be like to reach the top, or what waits above it. The ceiling seems higher than it should be. The wood seems older than it looks, and the silence stretches like a breath held too long. I leave it alone now. The ladder waits. I wait. And sometimes, just sometimes, I hear it hum faintly, like it knows I am below it. The attic feels smaller when it descends, the air heavier. Even the dust seems to hold itself still. The ladder does not move every night, but when it does, I feel the attic shift in its absence. As though the space itself is alive, I do not climb it. I do not pull on the ropes. I only watch and breathe and wait for it to fold away again, leaving the moonlight on the floor and the shadows to stretch back into corners, silent and patient, as if nothing had ever moved at all. The attic smelled faintly of cedar and dust. Moonlight spilled through the small window, silver and pale. Everything was quiet, until it wasn't. A soft laugh. High light, playful. A child's voice floating just above the floorboards. I froze. The air seemed colder, heavier. The sound wrapped around me, warm and strange, like velvet brushing against bare skin. I climbed the steps slowly. Each creak of the wood echoed in the narrow space. My breath hitched. The laughter stopped when I paused. And then a whisper. I didn't move. I only listened. Soft, rhythmic, teasing. The rocking horse sat in the corner. Paint chipped, mane tangled, eyes dulled. It rocked, slowly, back and forth. Back and forth. The seat pressed down. Weight, invisible, yet undeniable. I reached toward it. My fingers hovered. Cold. Damp air stirred against my skin. The horse paused. I withdrew my hand. The laughter returned, faint now, playful yet hollow. No footsteps, no shadow, just the rocking that mirrored the sound. I circled the attic. Boxes stacked high, curtains swaying. Nothing. Only the horse and the laughter. Only the soft pressure of that invisible weight. I knelt to examine it. The wood creaked beneath my hands. Cold, smooth. No dust disturbed, no footprints revealed. The air smelled faintly of wax and old fabric. I stepped back. The rocking began again, steady and patient. The seat sank slightly, like someone invisible had just shifted. I couldn't stay. The voice laughed softly, almost coaxing. I wanted to follow it, but the silence that followed was heavier, darker. I left the attic door open. The moonlight caught the horse's mane, glinting silver. I could still feel the weight in the empty seat, a presence that wasn't mine. The attic was quiet again. The laugh faded into nothing. Yet when I lie awake at night, I can hear it faintly, echoing behind walls, teasing, waiting, patient. The rocking horse waits. I do not touch it again. I do not climb the steps. But I know it remembers me, and I know the voice will never be gone. The attic smelled cold. Frost clung to the boards, sharp underfoot. The morning light crept pale and weak through the roof. The window was open, wide. Paint peeled from its edges. Snow had fallen in silence. Soft drifts settled atop the boxes, turning them ghostly white. The cold bit my hands when I touched the nearest crate. I stepped closer. Something pricked my skin, sharp, brief. A handprint, frozen, pressed into the snow. On my shoulder, I shivered. The attic was still, yet I could feel it, presence, patient, near. The faint hum of breath, or wind, or both. I glanced at the window. The frost was patterned, intricate. At first I thought it was just ice. Then I saw the prints. They weren't facing out. They had been facing in. Watching me, I held my breath. The floorboards creaked beneath my weight. The boxes trembled slightly, though the air was still. A shadow stretched from the window frame. I tried to step back. The handprint stayed sharp against my coat, cold, lingering. I rubbed it gently. It did not fade. The snow swirled in a sudden draft. I realized the attic felt smaller, the walls leaning closer, the ceiling lower, the prints on the glass. I had thought them marks from outside, but now I understood. They had been watching me all along. A whisper brushed past my ear. Soft, almost lost in the hum of frost. I didn't turn. I couldn't. The window sighed. A shiver ran through the beams. I wanted to close it, I wanted to hide, but the handprint stayed. I stepped back, and the snow beneath the window seemed deeper, almost holding the shape of something waiting. I left the attic slowly. The open window caught the pale sun. The frost sparkled, cold and cruel. I could feel eyes where none should be. A weight pressed at my back. The snow melted slightly, but the handprint did not leave me. It lingered, a reminder. A warning. I will never forget that morning. The window that opened itself, the snow that fell silently, and the prints that faced inward all along. The attic is quiet again. But some mornings, when the light falls just right, I can still feel the cold hand brushing against my shoulder. The room smelled of old wood. Dust hung in the air like fog, thin and clinging to my skin. In the farthest corner, a small box waited. Sealed with black wax, its edges chipped. I had never touched it. I never needed to. Years passed. I walked past it 100 times. The house carried its own quiet hum, creaks, whispers of settling beams, but the box never moved. Tonight, it was different. The moon leaned low against the window, silver light spilling across the floor. Shadows stretched long, touching corners I had ignored. I stepped closer. The box was gone. In its place, at the center of my bed, it waited. The lid slightly open, just enough to see darkness breathing inside. I froze. The sheets whispered beneath my hands. Cold air wrapped around my ankles. I could smell the wax, thick and bitter, like smoke in the rain. Something stirred inside. A soft voice, almost lost in the hum of the house, but unmistakable. "Welcome back." I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I could hear the floorboards outside the room, soft footsteps. Then silence. The box shifted slightly. The wax cracked. A faint warmth seeped into my fingers, though I didn't touch it. It pulsed, small and alive. I wanted to look away, but my eyes were held by the shadow in the lid. It swayed gently. Not quite shadow, not quite solid. Awaiting. A patience older than the walls themselves. The room had grown smaller. The air heavier. Even the moonlight seemed hesitant, fading where it fell on the bed. I reached, slowly, my hand trembling over the edge. The whisper came again. Softer now, intimate, near, welcome, back. The world tilted slightly. I smelled something damp, like soil turned over in dark silence. The hum of the house settled into my chest, tight, steady, unyielding. I pulled back. The box didn't move. Yet the lid opened just a little more, and I could feel the presence inside, watching, breathing, waiting. I lay down. Sheets cold against my skin, the box at the center of my bed. The whisper circled me. Soft, inevitable. I closed my eyes. The room held its breath with me. I felt the wax, the shadow, the waiting. It pressed against me gently, patiently, as if it had been there all along. Time stretched thin. The walls, the floor, the ceiling, all of it seemed to dissolve into quiet. The box was the only thing that remained. The only thing that spoke. I listened. The whisper softened into a hum, a slow, steady sound. The bed beneath me was warm. The air was heavy. The shadow settled over the sheets, and then silence. Complete. Perfect. The kind of silence that does not end. The box waited. Always. I closed my eyes. The house exhaled. And the whisper welcomed me home,